this video, I'm going to recreate and test this ancient spear-throwing weapon called an atlatl. Now, before I go full caveman and try to hunt with this thing, I need to make it, and in order to do that, I need to find a long, straight stick for the javelin. The other things that I need are going to be something to fashion into the spear head, the fletchings on the back, and of course, I'll need the piece of wood for the
atlatl.
That dog looks territorial. This riverbed is actually right behind a bunch of people's houses, and we don't know if we're trespassing or not, so we're trying to be a little bit sneaky. I hightailed it out of there, loot in hand, and on the way back I stumbled across this log, which at the time I thought would be perfect for the atlatl. Okay, how do I make this into this? It will require a lot of work to cut down. Fortunately, I also found these extremely rusty tools which I thought might aid in the carving process. So I figured I might as well restore these before building our ancient weapon. I harvested a section of our newly procured wood to fashion into a handle for the axe blade, which I made sure to sharpen only while using my special safety shoes. Okay, this should help to speed up the project. Now I could chop away like there was no tomorrow. I just wasted 3 days of my life. After all that, I decided not to use that big log and to use something more manageable instead. I read that the ancient hunters would carve animals into their atlatls. For my atlatl, I'm going to carve a coyote because it's native to the area of Argentina I'm currently living in. After a few hours of carving, this is what I've come up with. My attempt at a coyote ended up looking a little more like a gray fox. Now for this piece. I decided to use a section of this log after all, and I was able to repair the hatchet just long enough to get it off. I'm thinking to carve this into a mountain lion. I changed my mind. I figured to keep things more consistent, I'll actually use a cutoff of the shaft for this piece instead of carving up that huge log. Yeah, that other log was just really hard to carve. Well, I think my carving looks a little less like a mountain lion and more like the evil robot dog from Wallace and Gromit. I then had to prepare the piece to be mounted, but I went a little hog wild with a chisel and this happened. Fortunately, I was able to glue it back together, but that meant I had to wait for that glue to dry before I could continue working. So, I decided to use that time to fix that darn hatchet once and for all. That's much better. Now, with the atlatl, I had carved on some decorative details, then I rounded off the bottom and carved out a notch where the mountain lion would be grafted. And yes, that's a bird on my shoulder, because I'm a Disney princess. Anyways, I was then able to glue the two pieces together, which gave me the first half of our atlatl. Honestly, I'm really excited about how it turned out. It's really smooth and lightweight. My favorite part is definitely this funny guy on the front, although I do also really like the fox. My only concern is actually using it. I think it's going to end up being a lot harder than I expect. I mean, I'm expecting it to be harder than I expect, so it's going to be difficult. But before I can even know how difficult it's going to be to throw a spear with this, first I need a spear. Which brings us to the next section of this build, the spear. The piece I had was very crooked, so I flattened it against a wall, then poured boiling water on it. I repeated that process a few times and let it sit overnight. From there, I bent it by hand, which to my surprise worked decently well. Then came time to make the point. I had collected a few possible candidates, but it seemed like no matter what I did, I just couldn't break them into shape. I was just left with a mess. So I made a compromise and went with this much softer piece of slate, which was substantially easier to work with, but it won't hold up over time. It still looks pretty cool though. So now I'm going to try to attach the arrowhead that I made onto the tip of the spear. To fasten the arrowhead to the shaft, I tried an old method of boiling bark, but that was not working for me, so I instead utilized the ancient technique of unraveling a shoelace, which did the trick just fine. Now what it needs is the fletching, and for that I have a hawk feather and a pigeon feather. I did do some more feather hunting, but only came back with these. So I would have to make do with one hawk feather and a few pigeon feathers. I glued some of the pigeon feathers together and then wound everything onto the shaft using a thin wire, creating this disaster. But that would have to do, because now it's time to test the atlatl. Would this weapon be effective? Would the javelin go anywhere, or would it just fall at my feet? These were the thoughts that went through my head as I lined up my first shot. Well, it hit the target. Things were not looking good. But then this happened.
Oh my goodness!
That went a lot further than I thought it would.
More power than I expected.
I seem to be getting the hang of the power part, not so much on the accuracy though. But sure was flying far.
I've been overshooting the target, so I stepped back a few yards. Let's see if this helps my accuracy.
It most definitely did not. Then the arrow flopped over and over and over again. You see, the butt of the arrow has a notch in it, which catches the fox's nose, but one side is deeper than the other, so if it's the wrong way around, the arrow slips off and doesn't get any power. But if it's the other way, it catches on the fox and gets the full force.
With each throw, I'm getting closer to the target.
But before long, my shoddy arrow work started to show. I did my best to repair the damages, then I prepared to take the final shot of the evening. The arrow was too messed up, but I was going to need a good arrow for the day of the big hunt, so I made another one with a broom handle, cardboard, and a metal tip. All that gave me this arrow, which turned out to be much too heavy, and it broke on the first throw. So I made another one, this time much better, and after a few flops, after many flops, I started to get closer to the target. And eventually, I hit my mark. Again, and again, and again, and again. Okay, so maybe not that many times, but anyway, it was in that moment that I knew I was ready for the big hunt.
There's just something so visceral and masculine about chasing down and killing your own ham and cheese sandwich.